Anna had always felt the desert as a living thing, breathing under the scorching sun. The town where she had lived since childhood stood on the edge of the vast sands. The locals had long been accustomed to this silent neighborhood, considering the desert as something unchanging, like the sky or the wind. But Anna had always felt that something more lurked in this lifeless terrain, something ancient and unkind. Life here was slow. In the morning, the aromas of fresh bread wafted from the local bakery. Vendors set up their tents in the main square, and in the evenings, the streets emptied under the heavy heat of sunset. For most of the inhabitants, the only change in their lives was the change of seasons. Hot, stifling summers were followed by cool autumns, but there was little difference between winter and spring. People lived by habit, as if nothing was going to change. Anna was 32 years old and taught biology at the local school. She had always loved nature and often took her students on small expeditions into the desert to study rare plant species. These trips became an outlet for her in the measured life of the city, allowing her to take her mind off her daily worries. That day, Anna planned a routine hike in the desert. There was no sign of trouble. Gathering outside the school with a small group of students, she gave them a brief briefing and led them to the outskirts of town, to the beginning of the vast sand dunes. The sun was already high in the sky, and hot waves of air were rising from the surface of the earth. The path they were following was barely visible among the endless dunes. Anna had walked this route many times and knew it by heart. The students were chatting and laughing animatedly, but Anna felt uneasy. Something about this day was not right. She couldn't explain the feeling, but her anxiety grew with every step. The wind, usually gentle and warm, today was somehow harsh, cold. It brought with it strange rustlings, as if someone were whispering in her ear. "Miss Anna, look what I found." Nikolai's voice, one of her most inquisitive students, came from up ahead. Anna walked over to him. There was something glistening in the sand under the rays of the sun. She squatted down and carefully picked up the find. It was a small stone covered with strange symbols that Anna couldn't understand. The stone was warm to the touch, and she had the feeling that it seemed to pulse in her hand like a living thing. "What could it be?" she asked, addressing herself rather than her students. The symbols looked ancient, but she had never seen anything like it in this region. Could she take it with her? Nikolai asked, staring at the stone with wide-open eyes. Anna hesitated for a moment. Her inner voice told her it was a bad idea, but her professional interest as a biologist and researcher outweighed it. "Okay, we'll take it, but be careful," she said, wrapping the rock in a piece of cloth and putting it in her backpack. When they got back to town, something had changed. The air seemed denser, and the sky overhead darker than usual for this time of day. Anna wrote it off to fatigue and the long trek across the desert. But this feeling did not let her go even at home. In the evening, lying in bed, she thought of the stone again. Turning on the lamp, she took it out of her backpack and scrutinized it. The symbols carved on its surface seemed almost alive, as if they were moving in the light of the lamp. Anna felt a slight chill run down her spine and hurriedly put the stone back. The night brought strange dreams. she dreamed of vast sand dunes that seemed to be moving beneath the ground. She saw huge shadows moving beneath the layer of sand, as if they were looking for a way out. In these dreams, she heard whispers calling her by name, and the sound made her unbearably afraid. Anna woke up in a cold sweat, feeling that the dream was not just a play of imagination. Her whole body trembled as if after a violent shock. She looked out the window. A strong wind was blowing behind it, blowing sand through the streets, clogging the cracks in the windows and doors. But something about that wind was wrong. Her intuition told her that it had started the moment she'd picked up that strange stone. Waking up early in the morning, Anna felt strangely tense. The dream that had troubled her all night would not let go, and the memory of moving shadows under the sand stirred her mind. It seemed to her that the stone she had found the day before was somehow connected with this sensation. She put on her usual clothes and headed for the window. It was already light outside, but instead of the usual transparency of the air, she noticed a strange veil of sand, as if the desert had decided to infiltrate the city. Every day, the sand flooded the streets more and more, creeping up the sidewalks, hiding the corners of the houses. Anna decided to figure out what was going on. In the school where she taught, there was an old library with books that no one had opened for a long time. Among the dusty shelves, she hoped to find information about the strange stone and the symbols that covered it. As she walked past the empty classrooms, she stopped at a window and watched the wind drive waves of sand down the street, as if something was chasing it. When she entered the library, the familiar smell of old books enveloped her. An old lamp cast a faint light on the rows of shelves. Anna began paging through books about the region's history, myths, and archaeological digs. The pages of the books rustled like sand as she flipped through them, finding nothing useful. After a few hours, one ancient book with a faded cover caught her attention. She couldn't remember ever seeing it before. The book was surprisingly heavy. Opening it, Anna noticed that the text was written in an ancient dialect, but with commentary in a modern language. The chapter on the desert told of myths associated with the ancient sand spirits that were said to have inhabited the land long before the appearance of humans. These spirits, according to the legends, had the power to control the sands, flood entire cities, and cause storms that buried all living things. Anna read with interest, feeling a chill run down her spine. One of the legends described an ancient cult that worshipped the spirits of the sands. People made sacrifices to these creatures to keep them from destroying their city. Stones with carved symbols, like the one Anna found, were used as sacrificial objects. They connected people to spirits, and those who owned such stones could communicate with these beings. But the price was high. Legend also said that if the spirits were awakened, they would demand new sacrifices, and those who dared to disturb the ancient peace would face inevitable punishment. Anna closed the book, feeling the anxiety rising inside her. The stone they had found might be the very thing that could awaken the ancient powers. With these thoughts, she returned home. In the evening, Anna noticed that the air was even heavier, and at night she began to hear strange sounds, a quiet rustling, as if someone were walking on the sand right below her windows. Each night, these sounds became more and more distinct. soon she began to recognize them as whispers. Sleep came to her less and less often. Anna spent hours in thought, staring at the dark corners of the room where shadows seemed to move. Sometimes she thought she could hear her name spoken by a hoarse voice coming from the deepest parts of the earth. She knew that the stone had awakened something ancient that now did not want her peace. Another week passed, and strange things began to happen in the town. People began to disappear. At first, it was unnoticeable. A few of the missing were thought to have gone into the desert or left on business. But when several children disappeared, the townspeople began to panic. Anna, knowing that she was the cause of these events, decided to act. Another week passed, and the atmosphere in the city became tense to the extreme. The sand continued to invade the city stealthily but persistently, consuming it step by step. The roads, once well-traveled, were now covered with a thin layer of sand that seemed alive, as if it was moving on its own. No one ignored what was happening anymore. The residents began to notice that the disappearances of people had become a frightening pattern rather than an accident. But no one knew how to stop the phenomenon, much less where it came from. Anna could feel her anxiety turning into real fear with each passing day. The sand, which previously seemed to be just a particle of the environment, had become a source of constant threat to her. She could no longer sleep well. Every night, the sounds outside became more and more distinct. She thought she could hear the sand rustling at the door, the sound of someone treading gingerly on it, leaving barely perceptible footprints. One night, when the whispering outside the window became especially loud, Anna dared to go to the door and open it ajar. The light of the moon illuminated the street, but at first glance, there was nothing unusual there. After a few moments, however, Anna noticed thin, faint streaks in the sand, as if something or someone was slowly creeping beneath the surface. Waves of sand rolled over, leaving strange marks that soon disappeared, blending into the general mass. Anna slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, trying to cope with the terror that gripped her. She was sure now. The sand really did have a life of its own, and it was hunting people, looking for help. Anna approached several people in the town, but no one took her seriously. People were scared, but not ready to believe in mystical explanations for what was happening. All she heard in response were whispers of oddities and fears that no one dared to discuss openly. The only one who might know anything at all was an old archivist named Mark, a man long withdrawn, but with a vast knowledge of the history and legends of the region. Anna made her way to his house on the outskirts of town. The road there was difficult. Sand covered the streets thickly, and it was getting harder to walk on. When she reached Mark's house, he met her with an incredulous look, but let her in. "Do you know what's going on in town, Mark?" she asked as soon as she stepped inside. "I know," he answered slowly, looking at her as if he knew her secrets. "They are the spirits of the sands. I spoke of it years ago, but no one wanted to listen. Now they have awakened." Mark told her a story that was still passed down among the old-timers of the town. Once upon a time, long ago, there had been an ancient cult in these parts that worshipped the spirits of the desert. These spirits could control the sands, subjugate people, and flood entire settlements. People made sacrifices to them to keep the peace and avoid destruction. But But over the years, the cult disappeared, and the spirits faded into oblivion. However, their power has not disappeared completely. Every time someone disturbed the peace of the desert, the spirits returned, demanding new sacrifices. Anna felt an icy chill run through her body. Everything she had learned confirmed her fears. The stone they had found was not just an artifact, but a key that opened a door between their world and the world of the ancient spirits. "But what can we do?" she asked, hoping for an answer. "There is no way to stop them," Mark said quietly. "The only thing you can do is to leave the city. The longer you stay here, the more you become part of them. They will always find a way to take what is theirs." Anna left Mark's house in utter confusion. Her thoughts wavered between fear and determination to do something about it. She couldn't just leave the city. But how do you fight something that can't be stopped? Around her, the sand continued to move imperceptibly, as if breathing in unison with the ancient spirits awakened by her mistake. That night, she could not sleep. Outside, the rustling of sand was heard again, but this time the sounds were closer, as if the sand had already reached her doorstep. Anna sat at the window and listened. It seemed as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Mark's words echoed in her head. They'll always find a way to take what's theirs. Anna awoke in the middle of the night to a sound that made her heart quicken. It was a low, almost inaudible rumble, as if the earth beneath the city was sighing. The air in the room was heavy and thick, as if sand had seeped inside. She sat up on the bed, listening to the silence of the night. Soon, she heard that strange sound again, and her body was petrified with horror. The hum seemed to come from the desert itself. Anna felt that something ancient and powerful was awakening there in the depths of the sands, and it was already approaching. The days in the city became more and more disturbing. The disappearances of people became more frequent, and it was no longer a mystery. Residents began to leave the city, some in panic, and some in utter despair. Those who remained began to gather in the central square, discussing the strange phenomena. There was a tense silence in the air, as if the city was expecting an imminent catastrophe. But no one knew how to deal with it. Anna, armed with the knowledge she had gained from the old archivist Mark, realized that the key to everything was the awakening of the ancient spirit of the sands. She remembered his every word as if they were the last shreds of hope that could help her. One morning, she made up her mind. She had to return to the place where she had found the stone and try to stop the disaster while it was still possible. At dawn, she packed her backpack and set out for the very spot in the desert where this horrible story had begun a few weeks ago. The sand beneath her feet rustled as if a living thing was following her. As she traveled deeper into the desert, it seemed to her that the land itself became less real, as if the sand sought to swallow her up. The area around her was quiet, dead, but somewhere in the distance, she could feel movement in it, subtle but steady. When Anna reached the spot where she had first found the stone, she stopped. Nothing outwardly changed, but the feeling of heaviness in the air became almost unbearable. She crouched down on her knees, picked up a handful of sand, and remembered Mark's words again. They will always find a way to take what is theirs. Her heart was beating so hard, it felt like it could be heard all around her. Anna knew that the spirit she had awakened now demanded a sacrifice. She took the very stone with the ancient symbols out of her backpack. It felt heavy and cold despite the heat of the desert. Anna felt that this stone was not just an artifact, but a link between her world and the world of the spirits of the sands. Kneeling before the stone, she began to recite the words she had read in the book. Her voice trembled, but she continued, feeling the air around her begin to thicken. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shook. The sand began to move faster, giving the impression that it was coming to life right under her feet. Anna felt something huge and ancient awaken deep underground. Her breathing became heavy as she tried to concentrate to finish the ritual. But suddenly, it was clear to her. The spirits didn't just want to awaken. They wanted her to sacrifice herself. The sand around her began to rise, like a living entity reaching for her body. Anna realized she had no time left. Her mind was overwhelmed by a sense of hopelessness. She realized that if she didn't make a choice now, the sand would swallow her and the entire city. With a cry of despair, she picked up a stone and threw it into the center of the circle she had outlined in the sand, hoping it would stop the spirit. Instead, however, the sand exploded with a powerful wave. Anna felt her body being swept up by an invisible current, and she began to fall into the sandy vortex. Time slowed down. At the last moment, before darkness covered her, she heard a muffled whisper coming from everywhere. "You are our victim." Anna didn't immediately realize that she was still alive. Her body was buried in the sand, but she could feel the air still filling her lungs. It was a strange sensation, as if she were between worlds, drawn into the depths of the desert. Yet her consciousness remained suspended in some kind of suspension. There was complete darkness all around, but Anna felt the sand around her moving, enveloping her body like a living thing. With difficulty, gathering all her strength, she tried to free herself, but each movement only drew her deeper into the sand cocoon. She felt the sand literally squeezing her, as if an ancient force held her captive, unwilling to let her go. The same whisper she had heard over the past few nights came back into her head, but now it was clearer, and Anna realized that the spirits were speaking directly to her. "You brought us here. You awakened us. Now we demand the final sacrifice." The voice was low, rumbling, as if it came from the very depths of the earth. Anna closed her eyes, feeling waves of fear surge over her. She realized that she couldn't just leave, couldn't go back to the life she was used to. The sand spirits she had awakened were claiming her soul. Thoughts flashed through her mind that she was the cause of this suffering. Her mistake, her curiosity, had opened the gateway to the world of the ancient creatures. And now they were not going to retreat until they had gotten their way. But along with the guilt came a realization. Anna suddenly realized that her life was a price she had to pay, but she could choose how it would happen. She had to decide: either sacrifice herself to end it all once and for all, or try to find another way. The sand continued to move around her like an ancient ocean, pulling her deeper and deeper. Anna remembered Mark's words about spirits not stopping until they got what was theirs. She realized that if she didn't make a choice, The spirits would continue to destroy the city, and people would disappear one by one. "I accept your sacrifice," Anna said, her voice barely audible but firm. Suddenly, everything came to a standstill. The sand no longer moved. The darkness that surrounded her began to dissipate. For a moment, Anna thought she was standing in the middle of the desert again, under the light of the moon. But it was only an illusion. She knew that she no longer belonged to this world. Her consciousness, her body had become part of the ancient forces she had awakened. However, instead of completely consuming her, it was as if the spirits recognized her decision. The sand slowly began to move away from her body, leaving her lying on the surface of the desert. The wind blew warm, but no longer seemed threatening. She rose to her feet, her body weak but alive. Anna looked around. The desert was quiet again, as if nothing was happening. The city was somewhere far beyond the horizon, and its fate now depended on her. She knew the spirits had retreated, accepting her sacrifice. But now she was part of their world, and that meant her life would never be the same again. Anna stood at the top of the dune, looking at the city in the distance. From here, it seemed small, almost toy-like, like a piece of the past frozen in time. The wind rustled the sand at her feet, and the sound was like a lingering song to her, calling her to forget everything she had left behind. Her heart felt heavy, and a strange feeling settled in her chest, a mixture of bitterness and relief. It had been a few days since Anna had made the decision to become part of the desert spirits. She felt that now her connection to them was unbreakable, as if the very ground beneath her feet was a living being talking to her. But the more she felt this connection, the more she felt alien to the city, to its people. She realized she could never go back there again. Everything she had in her life, everything she had aspired to, was now buried beneath the sands. But not only that. The sand spirits she had awakened still wanted more. They would not stop. Anna could already see the sand slowly approaching the outskirts of the city, gradually flooding its streets, filling the courtyards, penetrating the crevices of the houses. The spirits would not rest, despite her sacrifice. They wanted to destroy everything, and Anna, realizing this, felt guilty that she could not stop them. But at the same time, another feeling was growing in her, a cold and cruel realization that she no longer cared what happened to this city. It had been doomed from the moment she'd found that stone. Her body was exhausted and her mind drained, but the inner voice whispered one thing: "Run. You don't belong here anymore." Anna knew the spirits wouldn't haunt her if she left. They were bound to the city, and as long as it existed, they would be here. But she could choose a different future. Let this city fall to the onslaught of sand. Let all who remained be swallowed up by the desert, as ancient civilizations had once been. Nothing else held her here. Anna turned away from the city and began to slowly descend the dune. With each step, she felt the sand beneath her feet, as if pushing her forward, helping her get away. The sand spirits were accepting her decision. They no longer whispered requests and demands in her ear. They knew she had left their city. Now their thirst would be quenched when the last house disappeared beneath the waves of sand. A parting glance back caused only momentary regret. The city that had once been her home now seemed alien, empty, devoid of meaning. Within its walls remained only those who could not see the coming catastrophe, and those who did not want to leave. Anna had betrayed them, but her heart did not ache for it. The desert called to her, and she knew that her path now led to other, darker, and more mysterious places. As the sun began to set over the horizon, Anna disappeared among the dunes, leaving the city to die in the sandy shadows. The wind picked up the last echoes of her presence and carried them away with the first waves that would soon engulf the place forever.